two pieces of paper.
Okay, it is 6:30, we'll call the meeting to order. All the planning commissioners are present and accounted for. Do you need to do your thing now?
Yeah, 6:30, the city county council call meeting order. Councilman Chuy Valero, Mayor Snow, and Councilwoman Burnett are present.
Okay, since it's the planning commission meeting, is there going to be an invocation? I'm confused.
Flag
What?
salute, yeah.
Oh, okay, well, I don't know who, we're going to have that.
City manager's supposed to
City
do the
manager.
pledge.
We don't normally do that at planning commission meetings.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together. Let us make wise decisions for the planning commission for our town. In your name we pray, amen.
Okay, I'm doubting that there's going to be any business from the floor, since I think there isn't any.
Might be.
Is there?
Well, we got one.
Okay, now we'll move on to the minutes of the December 22nd, 2020 joint city council planning commission meeting and planning commission meeting with any necessary corrections. So, do you have anybody have anything they want to say about those minutes?
Nope.
Change them or anything?
Move to approve. Second. Or waive the reading and approve.
Okay.
Second
Been-
minutes of
It's
it.
been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then we'll move on to your is there anything else that you need to do?
No, we approved them.
Okay, yeah. So, we'll move on to Christine, and
First of all, I just wanted to check, is Shelley on the line anywhere? Or?
No, she's just going to be listening after the meeting.
After the fact, okay.
Councilmember Morgan is not able to attend tonight.
Okay. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Mark Teague here with PlaceWorks and Interwest have worked with us, as you all know, with the housing element update and then now the zoning code update. The zoning code has some significant changes to it, and that's why I wanted to have a joint meeting so that Mark could present one time and show everybody a slideshow presentation. We're going to try to go through it in detail. A lot of these changes are California state law legislation. There's nothing that we can do about it. And it's unfortunate for our small community to have to go through this, but we're going to try to make it as easy as possible. There will be no action tonight, so we don't have to worry about forms or anything like that. That will all come to you guys next month in our regular meetings. We just kind of wanted to give you some time to let it sink in and go through this stuff and just know what's going to be coming. And I think after that, Mark, you want to take it over from here? Do you have Eric on the...
I will in just 2 shakes of a lamb's tail.
Doug, would you like a copy of the matrix to the zoning code? Everybody should have a matrix, and that should show you all the changes, as Mark goes through. He'll explain that.
Sent Eric the link, up to him to figure it out.
Oh, it's not there yet.
He's not quite there yet, but presumably he will be.
Well, at least I
And we're not going to wait for him. Because life is short, your time is precious.
Please ask any questions. This is going to be the time with our professionals here to answer them.
So eventually, one of us will be here.
Yeah.
So where would be a good place to stand? How about, I'll wait not in the way, and people can see. Hi again, my name is Mark Teague. You may have remembered me from the housing element piece that we did previously. Well, tonight we're going to go through modifications to the zoning code that were in part driven by the housing element and in part driven by changes to state law. And there's a little bit of modicum in there of just cleaning up things that are in the zoning code that probably needed to be tweaked before because of language or definitions, those sorts of things. So it's not all being coming from on high, but this was an opportunity for us to take a little bit look at the zoning code. So we're going to go over The changes that we made, just like we did with the housing element, we'll also be doing the addendum to the EIR for your general plan, so that we don't have to go through a bunch of CEQA. And just in case, and this is probably going to spoil the plot, we're not changing any zoning on any property in the city. No, this is all text changes that are in the code. There's nothing here that will affect the map in any way. So I like to skip to the end so there's no stress from wondering what's going to happen this evening. So we're going to go through the zoning code amendments, and you can stop me any time. I have pages upon pages of amendments. Chrissy did a great job in the staff report summarizing them. But the key pieces here, we're to streamline things. This is a mandate from on high to enable development to move through the process faster. I think it's humorous in rural areas such as this because you all get things done. This is really targeted toward the more urban areas where they have committees to figure out what meetings they're going to delay the other committees for. But in this particular instance, we run into those sorts of things in zoning codes. Some of it is to modernize the zoning code. And your code isn't that bad. We've run into some codes that are rather interesting. Updating the accessory dwelling unit. This is the golden haired child of the state in order to encourage affordable housing. This is the part that allows you to put we used to call them grandmother's quarters or mother-in-law quarters on property. They've changed the names now. They've got all acronymy. They have ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units. They have JADUs, which are junior accessory dwelling units. And all of those have been ensconced in state law, and then we'll be reflecting those in the zoning code as well. Okay, I'll be able to see in a little bit. Some of the code changes were to address changes in state law, as I mentioned. There's been a flurry of housing bills in the last, I'm going to say the last 3 to 5 years. Oh, thank you, dear. Look at that.
You have to turn it on.
Really need that for my voice? Oh, that's good, yes. So there have been a flurry of changes to zoning code in the last, or state law in the last several years. And sometimes the changes are so fast that we just can't keep up as an industry, let alone as a city or county. One of the changes is this emphasis on objective design standards. And there's a reason for objective design standards. The state law has changed and allows some projects to go through your process without any discretionary action. So as you may remember, discretionary action triggers CEQA, which is Latin for delays project. It also triggers your ability to establish conditions of approval. So what has changed through the Housing Act, SB 330, is that if it's a certain type of affordable house, actually SB 35, certain type of affordable housing, it skirts all of that. It's considered a ministerial act. You can only apply those objective design standards that are in place at the time. That's why there's been such a push through the grant monies that have come out in the last year or so to get communities to do objective design standards. So you aren't stuck with something you don't want because the process says you can't establish conditions. And just to reiterate, no properties are being rezoned. And I know this is a big deal because when you start changing somebody's zoning, people get really worried and offended. And we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. And I can repeat that over and over again if y'all forget. So most of the changes center around transitional and supportive housing, accessory dwelling units, density bonuses. That's a provision that's been in the code for quite some time. And that allows projects of a certain type of affordability to exceed the general plan density standards, but there are certain requirements and hoops they have to jump through. And then, of course, I mentioned the objective design standards. So let's jump right into the numbers. In all of these slides, the numbers refer to your actual code, which is available online, and I believe Chrissy provided the excerpts in your staff report. And
It should also follow along with the matrices that you guys have.
Perfect, awesome.
Now, I do not have 609 slides. I'm going to abbreviate some of this, but don't feel bashful about going back to the text. I can certainly do that if you have any questions. So the first one is to update the purpose and needs statement based on your general plan, talking about the fact that the city expects high-quality development, and to revise the definitions for group residence and assisted living and family daycares based on changes to state law. And in essence, these have to be allowed anywhere that the state says they have to be allowed in the zoning code. And so we've changed the definitions to take it right out of the code, so there's no question about what those are and when they can be allowed.
Now, can you give us kind of a for example?
Sure. So family daycare, so for example, I have an autistic son, and he goes to what we call the program. And it's a type of daycare, even though he's 26 years old, it's a type of daycare where they provide, in some cases, work in the community. They provide activities for him to do. He's allowed to socialize with his peers. It's very highly regulated. It's paid for by the Far Northern Regional Center. Those types of activities are allowed in certain zone districts. Similarly, it used to be really popular, you don't see them much anymore, but there would be senior daycare. So you would be able to take your mother, father, grandparents, whatever, to a place where they would be cared for during the day and give you a break as a caretaker. That's the type of things they're allowed for a daycare. That's different than a residential home where they would be living 24/7. Does that help a little bit? Those are examples. Assisted living is what it is. They have different tiers for that type of thing. There's assisted and there's nursing care. And then they also have just age restricted, where you just have to be above a certain age, but there's really no medical services provided on site. So in this particular instance, we simply modified some places, made it easier to find, put them in a table. One of the things that we heard when we first started was some of the requirements for zoning were a little difficult to track down in the code, so we put them into a single table so you can see that. And you can see what those look like within the code sections themselves.
In the matrix, they should be on page 20, 21, right?
Something like that, yes. On page, 21 and 22 of the matrix. Do they have a full copy of the matrix?
Yeah, you want one?
No, I have one here. I just wonder if they have one.
Jesse, can I get a copy?
Right, isn't it right here? I'll take one.
And so you can see, this is pretty standard for any zoning code, is to be able to have a single table that you can look at for setbacks, building heights, those types of things, rather than having them tucked throughout the text. Just makes life easier. Things are shorter, and it's good to take it to the counter. When somebody has a question, you can lay it down on the counter and they can see for themselves what the city requires. Let's talk a little bit about objective design standards. Now, these are what we were talking about before in terms of mandates. So there's a fundamental difference between a standard and a guideline. A standard is a requirement. You must meet this requirement. Not that the council or the commission can't waive that requirement, but that's a negotiation at that point. And that pops them out of the SB 35 guaranteed approval. At that point, they're trying to waive your guidelines. That becomes discretion. It's a whole other track. Guidelines are suggestions, things that the city would like to see, but don't necessarily require. And if those are parts of negotiation where we would like to see more trees, and in exchange for that, you can have another unit or you can do something else. That becomes really negotiation. Guidelines are associated with discretionary actions. Standards are mandatory. So a setback is a standard. The color of the building off of a color palette, that's a guideline, that type of thing. Unless you specify blue or green or whatever, that is the difference between a standard and a guideline. So if you look on page 23, talks about design guidelines, and then if you look on page 25, it talks about design standards. And the type of standards are for affordable multiple family residential. This is targeted directly at SB 35 projects and similar projects. So you will see that there are eligibility requirements within the law that are parroted here. So they can't just come in and say, hey, it's affordable. They have to show you, and it has to be documented that it is affordable. That's been one of the primary criticisms of the housing element law and the way some of this stuff is implemented. How does the city guarantee that the additional units are actually affordable units? And those are good questions, and this is why these are in here. You'll see under E on page 26, no hearing required. So I need you to fully understand that if somebody implements this piece of the legislation, your hands are pretty much tied. It's going to the building counter. They're going to make these standards part of the plan. They get a building permit. That is something a lot of cities have grief with, and I can understand why. But it's also a good reason to take a good look at these standards and make sure they're meeting what you expect as a community to see in the building. You know, for all intents and purposes, you've already said that apartments can go there because it's designated as multifamily, it's in your general plan, it's in your zoning as multifamily. So now what we're doing is talking about the details of how that goes there. So provided this meets your standards, they can get a building permit. It's very similar to how we would handle a single-family home, right? Because everybody's used to those getting built, and they get built in a certain way. It talks about expiration of approvals. There's a piece in here about neighborhood compatibility, landscaping, lighting. You can see it's quite extensive list of standards, and if I could implore you to do one thing between now and your next meeting when you act on it, is go through these and make sure they meet your approval. Because that's probably the most important change that's been made in state law recently and will affect you moving forward, is this ability for someone to come in and bypass your approval system. Well, I sound like doom and gloom, don't I? It really was not my intent.
We're going to blame everything on the state.
Yeah, except to a certain point, this kind of makes sense. I mean, you don't have a lot of red tape here. Red tape isn't something you manufacture in part of the world where people work for a living. In other parts of the state, like I said, they make up rules to have more rules. And that's really what it's targeted on. Unfortunately, it sweeps up everybody in that. Okay, so what we have here, allowing duplexes and triplexes by right in R2 district. It's kind of the whole point of a medium density district is to allow these things to happen. Again, if you want standards for these or guidelines for these, we can put them in the code. You can adopt them separately. It's really up to you how you want to handle that. Many communities find that this is an effective way of allowing duplexes and triplexes to happen without much having to touch the project. And then in R3 district, the primary change there is an increase in height limitation. And that's because part of it is we couldn't really figure out what 2.5 stories meant. And honestly, the difference between 2.5 and 3 is half. And it just made more sense. The height stays the same, so it's the number of stories. One of the things I'll caution you on limiting height and doing certain things, and maybe it's something you want to factor into your code when you deliberate on this, is if you're going to go 3 stories and you're limited to 35 foot, you have a flat roof. If that's okay with you, that's fine. If you want a pointy roof, then you make provisions for that in the code and say you can have a roof of a certain size, and that would or would not count in your building height. So those are the types of things that you have to think about when you do these designs absent a project, is that you can have an unintended consequence of all the buildings looking the same or all the buildings looking the way you don't want them to look. So one flat roof building may be okay, but 9 of them, it's not a good idea. So those are the sorts of things that I always say, think about multiples of these. How would that look as you're going through the process? And then we reduced the minimum lot size because we're trying to encourage infill. The most affordable housing you have and the most affordable development you have already has streets, water, sewer to it. It's a vacant lot. Right? That's the best place to do things. But part of the code was, in order to get any kind of density, it had to be a large lot. Not all projects are greenfields. A greenfield to me is something where we're having to extend roads and sewer and water to it. So the infill is really the ideal place to do that. And so the reduction of parcel size was intended to encourage people to build on those lots. And then one of the things that, we don't want to hide the ball here, well, this is not going to be happy, is the transitional and supportive housing is now permitted use. Transitional housing is defined by the state. The definition is in there. This is a direct state mandate to allow it in any zone that allows residential to occur. And so that's where they're in there, and it's allowed as a permitted use in that particular zone.
I just want to clarify though, this is not for a shelter, it's for transitional housing, so maybe you can.
Right. This is not a homeless shelter. Yeah, transitional housing is for folks convalescing or going through programs where they need to have a brief interlude before they're allowed back into society as a whole. But this is not a homeless shelter. That's allowed elsewhere in your code per previous amendments to the housing element. I have a good understanding what transitional housing is.
That would be more like that apartment complex they want to do in 99 in bid.
Well, that's permanent, that's housing.
So this is,
And this isn't permanent.
no, you're only there for a short period of time.
6 months.
Short-term halfway house.
Yeah, I mean, that's fallen out of favor, but that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. I didn't use the phrase because you get yelled at if you use the phrase. So, but since you did, I can nod my head and say,
I'm using it.
yes, sir. So that's it. I mean, these are not, have a nice day houses. These are regulated, they're run by groups. There's somebody for you to talk to if there's an issue. Generally, they are, the police department knows who they are, where they are, and as do the medical services and whatnot. So this is a, I'm going to say quasi-governmental type thing. It's usually run by a nonprofit or somebody else licensed to do so. There are professionals involved. If there aren't, then I would contend that's not a transitional place. Not something we want to encourage necessarily. Churches are starting to run a lot of these now. Yes, ma'am.
You may have said this, but you have a definition on page 14.
Yes. Yep. Housing that has a predetermined endpoint in time, so they can't live there forever, and operated under a program that requires the termination of assistance in order to provide another eligible program recipient to the service. The program length is no less than 6 months. It's usually no more than 6 months. So that falls into what we were talking about, where it's a regulated program. These people are getting assistance from a variety of sources to allow them to live on their own in the community. So the R4 district, we've increased the unit density to match what's in the general plan. That's the only change that was made. General plan allows up to 28. We made sure that you could also move up to 28 there. Updated the height limit just like we did. We left the height itself, it's the stories. I keep saying height, it's stories. We've updated the stories to be 3 as opposed to 2.5 for the same reasons that we did in the other zone district. And we've added SROs, which is an acronym that you'll see. It's for single room occupancy to these. Again, that's an edict from on high. We don't see those anymore. Those were the old boarding houses back in the day. You could go, you could rent a room from, old Lady McGrady, who would give you breakfast and dinner sometimes as part of the rent. But you just don't see much of those anymore. But in some more urban areas, SROs, or how students And some folks are able to live in that community, is because they just have this room. But I'd be hard pressed to see you having one here. I guess to a certain extent, Airbnb is kind of like that, but even then, I don't know that you'd have too many here. This is an amendment in order to be consistent with state law.
Are these different than studio apartments?
Yes, a studio apartment's an actual apartment. A single-room occupancy would likely not even have a hot plate.
Okay.
It would just be a room necessarily. And in some cases, you could share a restroom. It might be, say, a 7-bedroom house or what have you, and you rent out 5 of the rooms.
They have them in Chico.
Yes, again, a lot of students in Chico, right? They have them in San Diego, where I used to live. When I was a kid growing up, they were more prevalent. You get a retired couple that wants to make a little extra money, they would rent out the old room that their son or daughter lived in, and they would be there. It's starting to make a comeback in some of the more urban areas where rents are so outrageously high and housing is hard to come by. But it would be allowed here within this industry. Not seeing any more problems. I'm looking to see if there's any questions, so that's why I keep looking.
Yes, speak up if there are.
These things were not designed.
I know. For the expressions. And you can't just you have to let us know your feelings, because otherwise we won't know.
These masks are not intended for people with facial hair, because every time I talk, it moves. Okay. All right, so here we talk about the density bonus, reasonable accommodations. What that means is if you have a provision of your code that would prohibit somebody, say, with a wheelchair or with a walker from using it, like you have a provision, many cities have in their code that you can't do anything in the front yard. But what if you need to build a ramp in the front yard to get the wheelchair out? This allows that to happen without you having to amend your code. So it's reasonable accommodation. Doesn't mean you need to rechange the entire plan or grade it flat, but if somebody has a special need, then this would allow you to amend that without any difficulty. And then we talk about accessory dwelling units. The law on that bounces around quite a bit. I'd almost like to write that piece in pencil, because sure as heck we'll be back in a little while changing it to something else the state has decided. But for right now, it is consistent with state law. And they are allowed, and they've gotten quite sophisticated. Some of them now are built off-site, literally plunk them down and you're good to go. We used to call those trailers, now they call them tiny homes. Just saying. But there's lots of different ways to do this now, and it is an affordable way. One of the things that I scratch my head a little bit about is that in some areas, they're marketing them as income for retired people. And I guess the idea is that you put one of these on your property, it becomes an instant rental. Well, that's cool, except that it's very expensive to put an ADU on. I don't know if any of you have looked at this, but $75,000 to $150,000 is not an uncommon cost. And that doesn't include fees and other things that go on there. So I don't know where these are happening or what income level these people are at, but that's well beyond most retired couples' means. But in this part of the world, it's not uncommon to have 1 or 2 dwellings on property. One in the front, one in the back, or perhaps previously it was farm worker housing. And so this allows all of that to continue and move on. A fun side fact, in most markets, housing markets, those homes that are built with a mother-in-law quarters or something similar to that built in, don't stay on the market very long. They are snapped up almost immediately because we are now in the multi-generational housing where we call it Oreo generation. You're taking care of your kids, and you're taking care of your parents, and you're squished in the middle. And that's one of the things there. So it allows a wide variety of housing product that perhaps previously wouldn't have been allowed. So just something to think about when you see the new stuff coming in. And Chrissy, that's where I ended. Those are the major changes to your zoning. The secret addendum is just based on your general planning IR. And what that's essentially saying is nothing we're doing here is going to result in a significant physical change on the environment. And so we can use the previously certified IR. That's it.
All right.
I'm here, and did Eric finally pop up?
He did.
Oh,
He was
sweet.
waiting to be admitted, so
Yeah.
I let him in.
You did? No, you shouldn't have. So Eric and I are here to answer any questions you might have and avail us of zoning code, and we have two planners on the line. So if you have any questions about any planning, we'll be happy to answer any of those. So we're your pleasure.
Anybody?
Nope.
Yes. And that's why we're not going to take any action tonight, because it's very involved. And so we wanted you guys to be able to hear the presentation, go through it. If you have any questions, you can contact us. And then we'll plan to have a recommendation to the council next month. Same thing with any council members. If there's any questions prior to the planning commission meeting next month, just let Christina or I know. But like we said before, unfortunately, most of this is state legislature, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it.
But if you have that question, let us know, and we can let you know whether it's, are you
Right.
stuck with that, or, no, we've got some wiggle room here, particularly in the objective design standards. You have all flexibility, and now is the time to do that. I have a project that I'm working on in another city where it is an SB 35 project. It requires its own application process, is a rather convoluted piece of processing, because for the last 40-odd years, we've been doing planning through the environmental process. And what the state's done is removed the environmental process as the planning piece. So now what we have to do is actually do planning. So we have to guess what we want, write it down, and know that it will be applied across the board. So that's the part of this that you have almost 100% control over, and that you should probably really be taking a hard look at it, making sure it fits in with your community. Can't really overstate that. Not that you can't change it later, but it is a little more difficult to change it. You have to go through this process, for example, to change it. And I would tell you that changing it while you have an applicant is the hardest way to do it. Don't do that.
And that was in the design standards?
Yes, ma'am. They start on, starts on page
20, I think.
They run for several pages. Here we go. They start on page,
20, I believe.
is that far back?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It's page 23 of the
23 millimeters.
Right, and then 25 is where the affordable standards start. Well, it's good that you had some values.
I encourage you guys to look at the staff report as I try to show you what we have now and what it's going to be.
Is that this one?
Yes. And guided you through it as to what state law, what bill it is, or what page you can find it in the matrix. It might be easier to follow, because I know it is hard to follow. It shows you everything that's going to happen, but you don't know what it is now, so, that would be my only thing.
And I also, just to expand a little bit, there's going to be potentially some big changes that could occur that I didn't want, and Christie did not want you to be surprised by. So we wanted to make sure that even though it's required by state law, we don't have a lot of discretion about it, we didn't want you to come across as feeling surprised when you have somebody that's a member of the public in the future that's upset about a transitional housing project going in next to their home. So I'll apologize in advance. But I wanted really you to understand kind of the changes that were occurring at the state level so that you knew the right answers when people look at you in the future. And then secondarily, those items that we do have discussion about, to think about what you want the look and the feel of the community to look like, understanding the parameters that you have to operate under. So we have to increase density, then what do you want those dense spaces to really look like?
Density does not have to be ugly, right? So, design matters and your community matters. And, you know, the developers will tell you all sorts of interesting things about how it will drive them out of business and they'll never build in your community again. Okay. The ones that you really want to build will come in and say, hey, look, these three things, they're really a hardship. How about if I do it this way? And they start a conversation with you and you're able to make decisions from an informed position. I think having high standards is fine. I think it's where you get in trouble with standards is if one project comes in and this applies and then you have another project and you do something else. But you get in trouble with that for any planning or land use action, right? Consistency is important, as is precedent. So it's important that you have these standards and that you maintain them. And it's okay for high standards. It's absolutely okay. And again, it starts a conversation with folks that you want to build in your community.
And if one stopper were here, he would give the example of AutoZone in Corning versus AutoZone in Orland. You know, those developers the next day turned around new plans when they found out that we had a specific plan that they had to follow without even a second thought. And because of that, we have a better product in Corning. So those design standards do have value. Yes.
The other thing I'll let you in on is when you're out and about and you're in other communities, not everybody has a camera in their pocket. Back in the day when I started this, I had to carry a camera. Now you all have one. If you see something you like, take a picture of it. Give it to Chrissy, city manager. If you see something you don't like, take a picture of it. Chrissy, the city manager. Those are very helpful when we sit down with developers. These are the things the council and commission like. These are the things they don't like. Make sure you don't do something on the don't like list. Let's do stuff on the good like list. And I give that homework when I'm updating general plans or when I'm doing design standards. You're out and about, your commissioners, your councilmen, you know about these things. Take some pictures. And nowadays, it's easy to take a picture and text it to somebody or email it. Your job is done, and you can go have lunch. But that's important, because every now and then you drive down the road and you see something and go, oh, that is really ugly. And I take pictures of it. My wife's used to it at this point. But if I see something that's outstandingly beautiful, I want a picture of it, then I can show it to you and say, what do you think of this? And I prefer that to just talking numbers. Because if I tell you 30 units to the acre, people lose their minds because they're immediately thinking lots or they're thinking of projects. But in fact, they don't have to look that way. So anyhow, that's something I would recommend you do, particularly as you're going through this. Take a look at buildings. What we call it ground truthing. So when we write a code or we write a set of standards, we look around the town and say, okay, they like this. Could this be built with these regulations? That's what you want to ask yourself when you're evaluating this. Could something I like happen with these regulations? And if not, then they need to be tweaked. Nobody ever tells you how to read these things. They just say, read it. Well, I'm trying to tell you how to read it.
And they're a living document. So
Yes.
Don't be surprised if sometimes, in the next few years, we recognize the change that needs to be made because of an experience we've had. They are a living document.
I did have a question. Back on page 8, in the design standards, I guess. Can you explain a reversed corner lot, because the figure 17.1, it defines it as having roughly parallel streets around the lot, and they're perpendicular on both the reverse corner lots.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of confusing too.
Yeah, how does, or approximately parallel, or perpendicular isn't really approximately parallel.
Let's see, where's the definition?
It's like on page 9, at the top of page 9. A lot having frontage on two parallel or approximately parallel streets.
There's a good picture of it on page 8.
Yeah, the picture of it shows,
Yeah, it doesn't match.
it's a corner lot with a perpendicular.
Yeah, it just shows a regular corner lot.
Yeah.
Typically, a reverse corner lot would have a road on the other side as well. And this illustration is probably not the best, although there is a flag lot there.
Yeah.
But again, this way, as a planner, I would not consider that necessarily the reverse corner lot as drawn. So I'll work with Nick and with Eric on that, because I think that illustration is a little misleading. I get where they're going with it, perhaps the bulb with the cul-de-sac forms part of that, and it doesn't jive with the definition, so that's a good question. We never can in that part.
See how it has like the cul-de-sac is considered the other parallel street.
Yeah.
Just a piece though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the best. I know what they're trying to do with the graphic, trying to stick as many as you can in there, right?
Right.
That's where the flag lot comes from.
Yeah.
But as it's shown here, I'm not so sure that it necessarily meets the definitions you pointed out. It still would be fun to try to figure out what the setback was for that stupid thing. I wish I had a dollar for every time we had a discussion at the counter. Well, my front door is on this street. Well, that's neat, but that's your side yard. You scratch your head and just go with it. All right, we'll look into that and maybe get you a different graphic or different definition. Okay.
Do you want a copy of the matrix, Christina?
Okay, are there any other questions or comments or? Okay, do you need to close first or do we close first? Does it matter?
This is the only item on the agenda.
What?
This is the only item on the agenda, so it doesn't matter.
No actions, I said, they just need to close the meeting.
Okay, well, it's 7:13, looks like, or we'll close the meeting or adjourn the meeting.
City County Council has adjourned meeting.
What, no tie? Mr. Lawrence, no tie?
Didn't you say so?
And no mask. You guys have any plans?
More or less.
Before we all
I'll call you on the way home.
Just real quickly, I wanted to mention, on Monday, the 22nd, at 5 o'clock, we have a Zoom meeting planned with the city council for opportunity zones. At 5:30, if the planning commission is available, if you guys could all stay on Zoom and you guys could hop on Zoom, we're going to have a presentation from the Olive Grove.
Permanent supportive housing program.
It's a supportive housing project. It's going in on the corner of Highway 99 and State Lane. It's zoned by right. There's no discussion, but I wanted, they're planning on breaking ground in about a month, and I wanted everybody to be aware from the developers and from the county health department exactly what's going to be taking place there. So if you're hit by somebody from the community, you're able to answer their questions.
That's next Monday?
It's going to be Monday. I'll send out, or Lisa maybe can send out the Zoom invite. It's going to be at 5:30. If you want to hop on at 5, you're more than welcome to. We're going to be having a presentation on opportunity zones, but 5:30 is when the developers.
I'll try, I'm not very technologically savvy, so my son will have to set me up.
You can call in too. You don't, there'll be a call-in phone number.
Give me the information, I'll make sure y'all get it.
Tablet, and Lisa will be scheduling a time for me to get all the council members set up with any council.
And if anybody has any questions